yep, this time it's going to be some cheery news. It didn't quite turn out like that. And I'm sure, like myself, a lot of you likewise were absolutely gutted by the results. But I think once you sort of scrape under the surface a little bit, there is some real cause for optimism, and certainly some real cause for us to be redoubled in our motivation to sort of fight for our liberal values. And I say that partly because if you step away from the presidential election in the US, and if you look at a lot of the state referendum results, where individual policies can be put to a binding vote in different states, that quite a few states voted to pass policies, to introduce policies that we would view as very much our sorts of policies. So at the same time as Donald Trump was being elected president, several states in the US voted to raise the minimum wage. At the same time as Donald Trump was being elected president, a whole load of Republican state officials who had supported the most dreadful homophobic legislation in their state got voted out of office. And again, you can see these occasions where the liberal values that we recognise and that we support did succeed despite the presidential result. It's also worth remembering, given our own belief in electoral reform, that of the last 7 presidential elections in the US, the Democrats have actually won the popular vote in 6 out of the 7. Now, unfortunately, because of the electoral college system, their version of first past the post, that hasn't resulted in 6 out of 7 of the last elections resulting in Democrat presidents. But I think it does reflect how in the US there is still a huge amount of support, just as there is in the UK, for the sorts of values and the sorts of policies that we believe in. The challenge is to turn that into electoral success under the sorts of rules that we have to fight. And we suffer as much under first past the post as the Democrats do in the sort of slightly grander electoral college version in the US. And in doing that, I think there's a couple of important lessons for us from the US. And one is simply this. It struck me as I was seeing the dreadful results roll in on Tuesday evening, and I'm sure in this I'm probably similar to many of yourselves, I could immediately name a couple of horrendous, but a couple of Donald Trump policies. He wants to build a wall, he wants to do awful things with immigration and Muslims. I can immediately think of, I was really struggling to think, what were the policies that Hillary Clinton was going to introduce? Likewise, I can immediately think, like again I'm sure many of you, of Donald Trump slogans about Make America Great Again. And you have to stop and think quite hard to remember what Hillary Clinton's slogans were. So whatever we think about the content of Trump's slogans and policies, there's a very clear lesson there about the importance of needing really clear, really powerful, really emotionally resonant policies that don't just have people nodding in an abstract way of thinking, oh, that's quite interesting, but actually move your emotions and motivate people and fire people up. And for us, sadly, in a way, but it opens an opportunity for us. Obviously, Europe at the moment is absolutely one of those policies, which is a hugely motivating, hugely important issue, and one where the oddities of Labour's sort of pro-European, sort of not pro-European position gives a huge space on the political spectrum for us. And so there's a big opportunity there. In particular, obviously, there's a huge opportunity in this seat in the by-election in a couple of weeks' time. And I think it's worth reflecting just how important parliamentary by-elections are to us as a party. Because if you look at every one of our previous recoveries from electoral disaster, and those of you, there are 1 or 2 of you in the room who might almost be double my age, but certainly those of you who are a good chunk older than me will have been through even more recoveries from disaster than I have been, and know this even better. Every single one of them has had a sequence of really good parliamentary by-election results at the heart of that recovery. When we recovered from the disasters of Jeremy Thorpe on trial, in the High Court, conspiracy to murder, by-election victory in Liverpool was absolutely central to that. When we recovered from the early 1970s disasters, sequence of by-election wins, absolutely central to that. When we recovered from the disaster of the merger and finishing behind the Greens in the European elections in the 1980s, by-elections like Eastbourne were absolutely central to that. Every time we have recovered from disaster, parliamentary by-elections are central to that. And in part, that's simply because Most of the time, as you know, as we know at the moment, as in those previous periods of recovery, we really struggle to get the overall media's attention, etc. But a parliamentary by-election is a bit like, you know, a non-league team having an FA Cup draw match against the Premier leaders, because that absolutely gets the attention, and if we win, it absolutely gets the headlines and makes us relevant and makes us important. The other thing to note about, I think, parliamentary by-elections as well is that, you know, often the elections, particularly on the bigger scale, are massively influenced by forces that are well out of our control. You know, economic crisis, huge waves of people trying to move between different countries, you know, environmental challenges, really big picture issues that as an individual it's very hard to directly influence that much. But parliamentary by-elections are this like almost oasis of individual power within this grand scheme, because you look at all of those parliamentary by-election victories, you know, when we've pulled that off and when we've hugely boosted our recovery, it's not been down to some big global force or some pan-European force. It's been down to dozens and dozens of individual people deciding that that's what they really want to make happen, and working until their sort of feet feel blistered and their shoes have worn through, and they really think they need to be spending a bit more time at least washing their clothes, even if not tending their garden. Because a parliamentary by-election is one of those really rare occasions where the collective force of lots of individual members can overcome those much bigger forces that normally dominate politics. When we're fighting a general election, it's an absolute pain of the editorial line that people like the Daily Mail take. In a parliamentary by-election, that concentrated effort of us as individuals actually gives us an even chance, and even very often much better than an even chance. So I'll just finish with this sort of one thought. If you wanted to paint the perfect sequence of parliamentary by-elections for us, you'd have said, well, first what we probably want is a parliamentary by-election in a seat where we've never done hugely well, but where, you know, in our good years we've clearly been the main rivals, you know, the main rivals to the Tories, and where, because we've never got that close to winning, we're not going to have too much pressure. And then maybe once we've had that, it'd be nice to then perhaps have a by-election, maybe in a seat where we used to win. And so we've still got lots of councillors and organisation, because that would be really nice. And then you might also think, and wouldn't it be nice if at the same time, you know, there's maybe thoughts of another by-election beyond that. And you may have seen in the news, and obviously not everyone who gets questioned by the police by any means is subsequently charged or convicted, but it's worth just having in the back of our minds that Conservative MP for Bath, questioned by the police, charges of serious assault, if, and it, you know, absolutely it's a genuine if, but if that transpires, that he gets prosecuted and he gets convicted, no doubt about it, it's an offence sufficiently serious to end his political career. So not only do we have a fantastic opportunity, partly because of the great result in Witney and partly because of all the huge years of hard work and many people in this room to build up Liberal strength in this area over the years, not only do we have a fantastic opportunity in a couple of weeks' time here, just think about how every time in the past when we've recovered from disaster, it's been fuelled by parliamentary by-elections. You can see the route, not towards us having to spend the next 30 or 40 years slowly recovering bit by bit, but you can see the route to us recovering really quickly. And when you look around at the political scene and you think about the battles over Europe coming up, and you think about how authoritarian Theresa May is, and you think about how much the Tory party dislike immigrants, it is absolutely vital that we seize that opportunity. So thank you very much for listening, but all the more important, thank you for all the extra campaigning I'm sure you and I will be doing between now and polling day. Thank you.